I clutched the code report in my trembling hands, not from fear, but from the raw energy pulsing through my veins. It was a 42-page document, meticulously compiled from 6 different server logs, 3 data centers, 2 anonymous dev contacts, and 1 month of sleepless nights. It was a ticking time bomb, and I was about to drop it right in the middle of a war room. I walked into the executive conference room like a woman carrying a live grenade to a water balloon fight. The quarterly Q3 feature rollout review was already in full swing. Jake's voice, a high-pitched drone, ricocheted off the polished whiteboard like a fork scraping a plate. He was talking about synergy, user engagement, and I swear to God, emotional code adoption. I waited until his self-congratulatory speech ran out of air before sliding my report across the table. Q3 through Q4 modeling, I said, my voice as calm as a prayer before a storm. It accounts for API latency issues, a server bottleneck in our Hong Kong data center, and potential security flaws across 2 major plugins. Jake skimmed it with a dismissive flick of his wrist, as if he were looking at a menu for a restaurant he already loathed. Wow, that's pessimistic, he said, and a smirk spread across his face. It's real, I replied, my tone measured and even. If we don't refactor the core architecture now, we're going to leave our biggest clients vulnerable to a total system crash by December. He chuckled, a short, sharp sound. Serena, we don't publish doomsday manifestos. He actually said that, as if facts were just a mood and optimism could magically fix code. Then he did it. He reached across the table, clicked into my spreadsheet, and started typing over my numbers. He just started replacing my projected bug rates with 12% stability figures, as if our quarterly report was a vision board. Let's keep our feet in the real world, he added, grinning like a frat boy who just beat you at a video game using your own controller. And hey, real quick, before we go deeper, he paused and looked around the room. If you appreciate the painful poetry of watching a corporate train wreck in slow motion, do us a solid. Hit the like button and maybe subscribe. It keeps our team caffeinated enough to keep digging up these gems. You want more dumpster fires? We got them. All right, back to the chaos. I didn't argue. I just sat there while Jake talked over me, treating me like I was part of the furniture. One of the other VPs, Dave, the human equivalent of a Post-it note, just nodded along, clearly relieved it wasn't his turn in the meat grinder. I walked out of that meeting and went straight back to my desk. My hands were strangely steady. I pulled up the version of my report I had emailed myself 2 nights ago, time-stamped, digitally signed, full file history intact. I then opened a blank document titled Jake's Funeral March.docx and started logging everything. I had seen this before, the peppy forecasts, the blind faith in charts that looked good in a slide deck. The executive who smiled through the warning signs until they were standing in an empty virtual server room, wondering where the hell the data went. I'd seen it before, and every time, the company found some junior analyst to blame. But not this time. I backed up my models to a flash drive, then again to a secure folder on my personal cloud. 3 different passwords, 1 decoy. I even printed a hard copy and hid it in my grandmother's old recipe box. Paranoid, maybe, but I didn't believe in corporate safety nets. I believed in receipts. The next day, the calendar invite arrived. Team Realignment Discussion, 15 minutes. The title might as well have been Corporate Execution by PowerPoint. Jake opened the meeting with his usual slimy charm. Nothing personal, Serena. We're just moving in a more aggressive direction. Toward the cliff, I muttered under my breath. What was that? He asked. Good luck, I replied, smiling like a crocodile in a kiddie pool. By Friday, I was off the core development team. By Monday, Jake was on the internal newsletter, quoted as spearheading our bold new growth outlook. And by Wednesday, the first of the plugins I had flagged crashed without warning. System instability in APAC, Jake called it, a minor hiccup. I didn't say a word. I just clicked Save As on my backup document. File name, hiccup 001.docs. The HR woman had the kind of voice you'd use to talk a stray cat into a cardboard box. We just want you to know, Serena, this isn't personal. It's part of a strategic realignment. Strategic realignment was corporate euthanasia's phrase of choice. They didn't even try to make it look like anything else. My access to the core development folder disappeared before the meeting even ended. My Slack channel grayed out, a digital exorcism. By the time I made it back to my desk, the last email I'd sent to the Dev Ops team bounced back with a cheerful auto-reply. You have reached the inbox of a non-active contributor. I wasn't fired. Oh no. They were far too spineless for that. They just moved me to competitive intelligence, which in this company was code for read competitor blogs and pray for a merger. My new desk was wedged between the coffee machine and the window with the wasp nest. A strategic realignment indeed. Across the floor, Jake was already basking in his own spotlight. He'd scheduled an emergency board update to walk them through the newly corrected forecasting model. I watched through the glass wall of the conference room as he pantomimed confidence, waving his arms over my charts, with my name conveniently cropped out of the corner. I could practically hear the words through the glass. Upside potential. Accelerated growth curve. Optimistic tailwinds. Tailwinds, Jake? We sold enterprise database software, not dreams. I clicked into my inbox and reopened the email I'd sent myself. Full Q3 report, attachments intact, data untouched. Subject line, Q3. Forecast original, unedited, time-stamped a week before the meeting. A tidy little insurance policy. Then I opened a second file. It was a clean, annotated version of my model with a note at the top. If I get hit by a bus, or corporate, read this first. I saved that one to an encrypted flash drive and dropped it into the lining of my purse, right next to the emergency ibuprofen and my spare mascara. The thing was, Jake could overwrite my numbers in a boardroom, but he couldn't overwrite what was about to happen. I started making copies, not just of the forecast, but of the internal correspondence. Emails from our tech lead expressing early concern. Slack messages where I warned about system volatility. I even transcribed a voicemail from one of our contractors in Singapore who literally said, "Your numbers are dead on, Serena. I don't know why they're not listening." I stored each file in 3 separate locations, 2 digital, 1 analog. I even burned a copy onto a CD just to be petty. Then I created a private folder on my cloud drive titled Truth Bomb. Inside, I stored every scrap of evidence I would need when this all inevitably turned to ash. I wasn't being stupid. I knew the second domino was already wobbling. Code was not some abstract theory to me. It was a living, twitching beast, and I could smell when one was bleeding. I had lived through the 2021 Log4j vulnerability. I'd seen what happened when corporate optimism met reality head first. But more than anything, I knew Jake. I'd seen the way his nostrils flared when anyone else looked competent, the way he preened when the board nodded, even if he was talking out of his ass. He was one bad quarter away from blaming my model for negative energy. Fine, let him shine. I had patience, and I had records. While Jake preached at all-hands meetings about owning the future, I started making my own quiet calls. Not to competitors, but to clients. Old contacts, friendly procurement heads. Just soft conversations, hypotheticals. If, say, we're looking for alternative back-end solutions in Q3, what would you need to know? I never offered my model, never mentioned the realignment. I just asked questions and listened. And when one of those contacts, a VP from a major Midwest distributor, said, "We've been hearing rumblings. Do you think we'll actually see delays?" I paused, smiled into the phone and said, "I'd start preparing a plan B." Jake's name was still printed at the bottom of every glossy deck the company passed around like gospel, but the fuse had already been lit. It started on a Monday, because of course it did. The subject line hit every inbox like a brick through a stained glass window. Urgent. All services from cloud provider C temporarily suspended. Inside were 2 grim paragraphs about an ongoing power outage at Data Center 4B, hardware failure, and indefinite logistical delays. Translation: one of their top-tier component suppliers was now playing Uno with fire and gasoline. The DevOps team pinged the group chat like they had just discovered electricity. Does anyone have backup routing? This will hit all September orders. Another ping. Can we escalate with the server provider? Fast! The emojis came next, and they always signaled panic. I watched it all unfold from my exile cubicle by the vending machine. It was like watching a house burn while the homeowners argued over curtain colors. And then Jake did what Jake does best. He waved it off like someone had just reported a soggy breakroom donut. One hiccup doesn't sink a ship, he said, standing in front of the whiteboard like a motivational speaker at a gas station convention. Let's not catastrophize. Catastrophize? The same guy who called my spreadsheet a doomsday manifesto was now zen mastering his way through a full-scale IT aneurysm. His new plan? Wait it out. Let optimism do the heavy lifting. Hope the power just magically turns back on. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to, because an hour later, my phone buzzed. It was Marty from CSG Industrial. I hadn't heard from him in over a year. I let it ring once, then picked up. Tell me you've seen this cloud thing, he said. No hello, no small talk. I've seen it. You still got eyes on your old forecast? He asked. I do. A pause. You were right, weren't you? I leaned back in my chair, watching the chaos simmer through the glass wall of the main conference room. It was close enough. He exhaled through his teeth. Our October line is screwed if we don't pivot. You think it's time to look at an alternative solution? I glanced around. No one was watching. Jake was too busy explaining to the sales VP how geopolitics can't be modeled, man. My fingers moved across the keyboard without hesitation. I'd start identifying alternates, I said, my voice calm and quiet. Even if it costs more, speed is about to matter more than price. Another pause. Off the record, way off the record. Thank you, and tell me if you see anything else coming. He hung up. No promises, no email. Just the kind of conversation that happens when the truth starts tapping on the window and only a few people bother to look. Back inside the walls of denial, Jake was rehearsing lines for an upcoming investor call. He was planning to describe the disruption as temporary regional fluidity. I almost laughed. If they ever held a corporate poetry slam, he'd win by pure velocity. But beneath the sarcasm, I felt something shift. The model I'd built, the one Jake had buried like a bad dream, was beginning to hum with accuracy, like an old machine warming up, proving it still worked. I started sleeping with my laptop open again, not for work, but for updates. Real-time server delays, social media chatter from developers on Reddit, even TikToks from junior engineers in Guangzhou who were live streaming the server backups with captions like, "Guess who's not making quota this month?" Each data point lined up like teeth on a gear. I updated my personal document quietly. No broadcasts, just line edits and small notes in the margins. Cloud provider C down, cloud provider B likely next. Prepare alternates for database lines. Verify storage inventory. And still, I waited, because I knew this wasn't the explosion. This was the tremor, the air pressure shift before the tornado eats your mailbox. Jake's forecast was still the official gospel. He paraded it in front of anyone who asked. DevOps was still duct taping together alternatives while pretending the ship wasn't taking on water. But the clients had started whispering. The suppliers had started glitching. And I, quietly, patiently, viciously, was preparing, not for revenge, but for proof. It came as a LinkedIn message first, of course. Heard some chatter? You free to talk? R. Whitaker. Richard, a retired board member, former CFO. The only executive I had ever met who still carried a calculator watch and called spreadsheets sexy. He'd mentored me back when I was a junior analyst, back when the company actually listened to the quiet people in the room. He'd been the one to pull me aside after my first brutal budget meeting and say, "Just because the loudest guy wins the room doesn't mean he wins the quarter." I called him the next morning from the loading dock, where the air was cooler and nobody cared what you were doing unless you blocked the forklift ramp. He picked up after one ring. "Tell me it's not as bad as they're saying. That depends on who they is," I said. "I've heard 2 different forecasts," he said, his voice low and rough like gravel under truck tires. "One says we're about to break revenue records. The other says we're about to start losing million-dollar accounts to a clogged toilet in the data pipeline." "I wrote the second one," I said. A silence, long and deliberate. Then he said, "Send me the full report. With timestamps, timeline, everything." I did. I didn't hesitate. 15 minutes later, he replied with exactly 3 words. "Keep everything quietly." I stared at the message as if it might burst into flames. "Why?" I wrote back. "Because loud gets buried. Quiet gets investigated. No emojis, no fluff. Just a warning wrapped in wisdom." That same afternoon, Jake held a company-wide all-hands meeting. I tuned in from my sad little corner next to the humming Pepsi machine, watching him beam through my screen like the protagonist in a delusion. "We're on track for a record-breaking Q3, he announced, smiling so hard it looked painful. "Our new numbers show accelerated market demand, reduced friction, and investor confidence at an all-time high." I blinked. Reduced friction? A full container of our key server components was currently bobbing uselessly in a port outside Ho Chi Minh like an orphan suitcase. He clicked to the next slide, a chart so inflated it may as well have been filled with helium. My forecast had predicted a 4% contraction in server availability. His chart showed 11% growth. I squinted at the axis labels. Monthly unit assurance, a metric that, to my knowledge, did not exist. Someone asked a question in the chat. I recognized the name. Jorge from Client Success. "Are we adjusting any numbers to reflect the APAC supply issue?" Jake replied out loud. "We're being proactive, not reactive." Translation: "No." Then came the investor slides, a section titled Confidence Through Momentum, trademarked, for God's sake. Underneath it were quotes from partner firms, most of them 2 years old, dragged out like puppets at a funeral. And still, the chat filled with clapping emojis and heart reacts, gifs of dogs wearing sunglasses. I closed my laptop. I sat still for a long time, listening to the vending machine grumble through its idle cycle. They were erasing me. They were doing it with pastel graphics and fake terminology and recycled jargon. And everyone was clapping like hypnotized seals. But my data wasn't gone. It couldn't be wiped with a slide deck. It lived in backups, timelines, spreadsheets saved under cryptic file names like Yoga Retreat Budget, XLSX, and Petty Cash Deck 2019. Zip. I wasn't going to fight him with volume. I was going to fight him with gravity. Clients were watching. I knew it because 2 more emails came in before lunch. One from a procurement officer I hadn't spoken to in 8 months, asking, "Do you think this is going to get worse?" And another from a competitor's analyst, with just a subject line. "You were right, huh?" The cracks were forming, not in the numbers, but in the trust. And Jake was still smiling, still talking, still building his throne out of matchsticks and telling everyone not to worry about the smoke. The second supplier dropped on a Wednesday, the third on a Friday, like a grim punctuation mark at the end of a sentence no one wanted to read. Our Chennai data center shut down due to flash flooding. Factory lines were submerged, and raw material transit was delayed by weeks. Then Jakarta fell, strikes this time, at a steel tube manufacturer, one of their key inputs for Client 4's heavy rig assembly. I had marked them both in red back in February. No one had listened. Now the alarms were finally blaring. By Monday, the inboxes lit up like a Christmas tree on fire. Urgent. Client 2 escalated to legal. Client 5 threatening to terminate contract. Failure to deliver. Executive response needed. Delays compounded. Inside those emails were threads of desperation. Account managers begging leadership for guidance, clawing for just something to say on the calls. Their words carried the tone of people who had been selling dreams that suddenly felt like lies. And where was Jake? Nowhere. He missed his first internal check-in with key accounts since his record-breaking Q3 speech. He scheduled his second and canceled the third. Whispered rumors said he'd told his assistant to screen all unrecognized numbers. I, on the other hand, had already taken a call that morning from the VP of Procurement at Client 1. "Look, I know you're not technically on point anymore," he said, "but you're the only person who flagged this 6 months ago. We need a plan." I didn't hesitate. I already had one. "I've mapped 3 alternate suppliers for your rig components," I said, opening my private dashboard. 2 domestic, 1 in South Korea. The lead times are longer, but they're still shipping. Want me to send over the contacts? You do that? I already did, I said. Check your inbox. He paused. Are you authorized to do this? Nope. Another pause. Good. The next day, the client sent me a gift card, a small gesture, $50 to some artisan coffee shop in Vermont. I didn't even drink coffee, but it meant something. It meant someone in the slow-motion train wreck saw me. Back inside the company, Jake issued a 3-line memo about the delays. He called them unexpected logistics variables and assured the team that leadership is actively assessing solutions. No apology, no accountability, just enough syllables to sound like he was doing something. The team, once a sea of clapping emoji cheerleaders, had grown suspiciously silent. Slack reactions dwindled. The MEQ3 growth channel went dark. One account manager posted a meme of a dumpster on fire floating down a flooded street. It got 147 reactions and no reprimand. I kept working. Not for the company, not for Jake, but for the clients. I had built relationships over the years. Not the golf course kind Jake favored, but the quiet ones. Late-night emails, honest data, helping them build reorder buffers when no one else cared. I sent 5 more alternate sourcing plans that week. Quiet, targeted, efficient. I didn't ask for credit, but credit came anyway. One client looped me into a vendor email chain. Another copied me on an internal sourcing approval. And late on a Friday night, an email landed in my inbox from a client executive I had never spoken to before. Subject: Appreciate your clarity. Body: If your leadership doesn't recognize it, others will. I read it 3 times, then archived it with the rest of my receipts. Because this wasn't about being a hero. It was about not letting fools burn the house down while pretending it was a sauna. Jake still wore the crown. On paper, he still owned the forecast. But out here, where trust lived and money moved, I was already queen. The warning came not with sirens, but with silence. Slack channels slowed to a crawl. Meetings that once boasted half the department were now invite-only. Directors whispered in doorways with the urgency of people realizing the iceberg wasn't melting. It was rising. By Thursday, the legal department, usually as animated as a graveyard, started pinging people for clarity meetings. These weren't disciplinary. They were the kind of conversations that started with, "We're just trying to get our arms around the timeline." Timeline, that was the word. The Q3 pipeline had gone from boardroom trophy to potential liability exhibit in under a week. Rumors flew faster than emails. One executive told their assistant to find every draft model ever submitted this fiscal year. Another was overheard muttering, "If we go down for this, it won't be because of a damn spreadsheet." And somewhere between the quiet legal scramble and the top floor panic, the CEO caught wind. It started with a phrase I never thought I'd hear float back to me: forecast inconsistencies. I heard it secondhand from a friend in finance. The CEO had said it aloud twice in a room full of senior leadership. Said it while holding a printed slide from the last all-hands meeting, tapping the numbers with one finger like they owed him money. I sat perfectly still in my corner cubicle, pretending to review supplier logs while my ears burned. I was no longer invisible, but visibility came with risk. If they sniffed me out too soon, Jake would bury me again, this time with spin or worse, legal muscle. I needed someone else to break the seal. That's when Richard Whitaker stepped in. No warning, no fanfare, just a Dropbox link in my inbox with a single sentence. Board review scheduled. These will speak louder than you ever could. Inside the folder was everything I had sent him. My original report, forecast files, screenshots, Slack exports, dates, times, and the deltas between my model and the one Jake paraded. Untouched. No edits, no commentary, just data. The kind that didn't need exclamation points or italics to scream. I stared at the link as if it might explode in my hands, because once the board had it, there was no pulling it back. No half measures, no plausible deniability for anyone involved. The truth now was a live grenade. I still didn't reply to Whitaker. I didn't need to. The next morning, the company calendar updated. A subtle, almost coy special session, Q3. Pipeline and projections review, only. No agenda, no attendees listed, just the CEO's initials next to it. That was enough. By noon, Jake was walking faster through the halls. He stopped making eye contact. His assistant started printing everything. Everything. Full inbox dumps, hard copies of decks, even draft notes. One intern joked he looked like a man building a paper boat for a flood. The temperature shifted. Directors who had once parroted Jake's buzzwords were suddenly unavailable for his check-ins. DevOps went dark. Client success canceled its Q&A. The marketing team issued a revised Q3 messaging document that was, in effect, a long way of saying, "Don't promise anything." Nobody said my name, but twice that week, I caught people looking at me too long. In the hallway, another time in the break room, where someone from Risk glanced at me, paused, and said, "Hell of a forecast, huh?" I just smiled, because the storm I had warned them about had arrived, and this time, I wasn't the one getting wet. The first contract termination came in just after 9 a.m. Client 4, the big one. 7 figures a quarter, gone. Subject line: Notice of termination. Breach of fulfillment clause. The next one hit before lunch. Then another before the close of business. 3 in a single day. Each with a different signature, different phrasing, but all hammering home the same point. You promised. You didn't deliver. The revenue dashboard turned from green to red like someone had drained the company's blood supply. The new Q3 projection, once hailed as aggressively optimistic, now looked like a bad joke stapled to a gravestone. Jake went on internal damage control, a town hall over Zoom where his blazer barely hid the sweat stain growing under his collar. "These are unforeseen variables," he said. His jaw clenched so tight you could have cracked granite on it. "Geopolitical dynamics, market elasticity, unexpected cascading failures." Translation: I have no clue what I'm doing, but if I say it confidently, maybe you'll blame the universe instead of me. Someone in finance wasn't having it because that afternoon, a slide appeared. No name, no source, no context, just a single comparison chart quietly posted to the Ops Intel Slack channel and left to rot like a warning on a bulletin board. On the left side was Jake's Q3 forecast. On the right, my Feb submission, color-coded and labeled. Jake's slide, 11% growth, supply stability, top-line surge. My slide, minus 4% contraction, flagged ports, escalation risk by mid-Q3. Beneath them, a timestamp on each. Jake's March 3rd, mine February 7th. There was no commentary. It didn't need any. It was a murder scene laid out in Excel. People started whispering, not just quietly now, but strategically. Wait, was that the forecast she got demoted over? Didn't she get moved for being too negative? Where the hell is she now? Meanwhile, the board finally snapped the rubber band, issuing a company-wide request. Submit all forecast source materials for Q3 and Q4, including revision history by EOD. Jake tried to spin it, claiming he was collaborating across departments to ensure transparency. But the word got around fast. His calendar was booked back-to-back with legal, not strategy, not ops. Legal. Then quietly, I got an email. No subject, no name, just a burner Gmail account and one sentence. They're asking questions. Want to talk? My heart jumped, not in panic, but in recognition. I had waited for this. The voice of the system, once tuned to ignore me, was now clearing its throat. I didn't respond. Not yet. Instead, I reopened my truth bomb folder, triple-checked the access logs. Everything was still intact. Every file, every note, every projection, raw and unedited, was a testament to the fact that I had written those numbers at my kitchen table weeks before the company pretended the world was still smooth sailing. I remembered the night I logged the Jakarta port risk while microwaving leftover dumplings. I remembered the exact hour I had said to myself, if they ignore this, they're going to bleed. And now they were bleeding. Jake's reputation, polished, smug, built on sound bites and handshakes, was in freefall. His pet executives stopped CCing him. His talking points vanished from the marketing document. Even the intern he used to bark at stopped refilling his water bottle. I, meanwhile, was getting fresh LinkedIn requests from strangers with VP titles and private consulting firms in their bios. No one said my name publicly yet, but they would, because the collapse had begun, and the truth was louder than ever. The invite dropped at 6:42 a.m., subject line screaming in all caps. Emergency Investor Livestream, mandatory attendance. No agenda, no prep packet, no spin. Just a broadcast link and a time, 10 a.m. sharp. Within minutes, the office buzzed like a hive that had just realized half the honey was gasoline. Directors wandered the halls with phones pressed to their ears. Executive assistants suddenly looked like they were plotting evacuations. The company Slack slowed to a crawl. Nobody dared say it, but everyone knew what this was. It was the reckoning. I didn't plan to watch. I had been burned by too many performative apologies, too many we value transparency speeches that melted faster than ice in August. But something told me this one was different. So, I grabbed my mug, brewed the darkest tea in my cabinet, and opened my laptop just as the CEO's face filled the screen. No intro music, no slideshow. Just him, stone-faced, no tie, barely blinking. Jake was seated beside him, looking like a man who had just been told his parachute might be decorative. "Thank you for joining us," the CEO began, his voice flat as drywall. "We've called this session to address growing concerns about our Q3 performance, contractual liabilities, and forecast discrepancies." That last word landed like a thrown wrench. Jake jumped in, too fast, too eager, rattling off a word salad that tasted like desperation. Macroeconomic turbulence, supplier irregularities, market misalignment. And I had to pause and laugh. Unexpected forecast headwinds. Forecast headwinds. Jesus wept. But the CEO didn't smile. He didn't even nod. He just let Jake dig. And then, mid-sentence, he held up a piece of paper, a printout, crisp white, double-stapled. I didn't need to squint to recognize it. I had printed that exact version months ago and hidden one in my glove box. "This," the CEO said, cutting off Jake cold, "is a forecast submitted to leadership on February 7th. It flagged supplier instability across APAC, predicted delays in steel component delivery, and highlighted escalation risks with 3 of our top 5 clients. It even included corrective recommendations, none of which were followed. Silence. You could feel the air suck out of the stream like someone opened a hatch in space. The CEO turned, looking right at the camera. "Can anyone tell me," he said slowly, "why we fired the one person who got it right?" The live stream chat exploded. Investors, partners, media reps, all typing at once. Who wrote it? When was this submitted? Why wasn't this disclosed sooner? What is happening? Jake opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His face twitched. His own voice didn't trust him anymore. He looked like a kid caught cheating mid-final, still holding the answer sheet. The CEO didn't wait for an answer. He flipped to the second page of my forecast and read a line aloud. October contracts are at risk unless alternate sourcing is prioritized by end of Q2. He folded the pages once, neatly. We didn't just miss this, we buried it. Another beat of silence. A full internal review is underway. Starting today, I've placed the VP of Strategic Forecasting on administrative leave pending investigation. Jake's face didn't register the words at first. Then it did, and something in him collapsed. His shoulders dropped. His eyes went glassy. You could practically see the resignation letter forming in his frontal lobe. I sat back in my chair, tea untouched, my screen glowing. I didn't smile, not yet, because this wasn't over. Not until the cameras shut off and the fallout began. But right here, right now, in front of clients and shareholders and colleagues who once treated me like background noise, my voice, quiet, precise, and buried for months, was the only thing still standing. The lie had collapsed in real time, and everyone had watched it burn. They offered me the seat before the dust had even settled. An official email wrapped in too many pleasantries arrived 2 days after the broadcast. Subject line, invitation to rejoin interim strategic leadership role, signed by the same board that had once approved my removal. Same boilerplate phrasing, valued expertise, critical transition period, strong cultural fit. I read it once, closed the tab, reopened it, and deleted it, because I didn't want the seat anymore. I wanted the table, and I wanted it somewhere else. The very next morning, I updated my LinkedIn. Founder, Cast Fidelity, Independent Strategic Foresight, and Market Risk Advisory. We don't make guesses. We make warnings. You decide who listens. No launch party, no press release. Just an email sent to a short list of names. No sales pitch, just a question. Still looking for supply clarity in Q4? Within 48 hours, 3 of the company's top 5 clients replied. 2 signed retainers that week. 1 flew me out to speak with their entire procurement team. By Monday, I had a contract that paid more than my old yearly salary, and it didn't come with an org chart or a middle manager trying to overwrite my spreadsheet with fairy tales. Back at my old company, the house of cards collapsed with a whimper. Jake's badge was deactivated before his scheduled clarity meeting. The internal announcement called it a transition, but someone leaked the real memo. Jake Ellison is no longer employed with the company, effective immediately, due to serious internal process failures and the suppression of material data. No severance will be issued. We failed to listen. We will not make that mistake again. It made the rounds in Slack, then Reddit, then industry circles. By the end of the week, one of my contacts forwarded me a screenshot from a private board email. The CEO had attached my forecast under the subject line, Reference Model, Accuracy in Uncertain Times. I saved that one, not to gloat, just to remember. Because I never needed applause. I needed impact. And now, I had it. In my new home office, a converted sunroom, where suits were not allowed, I pulled up the live stream replay one more time. Not out of ego, just for closure. The moment the CEO held up my report, the frozen panic in Jake's eyes, the silence in the chat that said more than 1,000 comments ever could. I took a sip of my black coffee. No cream, no sugar, just truth. And then, under my breath, with no malice and no glee, just quiet, perfect certainty, I whispered, "Real enough for you, Jake?" And then I hit play again. The story of Serena teaches us that while charisma and optimism may win a room, they cannot overcome reality. The truth, backed by data and careful observation, is a powerful force. Even when it is ignored or buried, it will eventually surface, and its impact will be undeniable. The moral is to have the courage to stand by your work, even when it is unpopular. Be patient, continue to document your findings, and build a network of people who value honesty and clarity. In the end, a reputation built on integrity and foresight will always outlast one built on ego and empty promises.